Kate McKenna, welcome to the Mom Existence.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited that you are here. So freaking excited because you more recently did a series, helped produce or produced. Did you fully produce it?
I did. Of course, it was
all
a team
you.
effort, but it was my idea. I cast it, produced it, hosted it. So I'm super proud of it.
Amazing. Called the Momlife Crisis, which I saw a bunch of clips through you and on social media. And I started listening to those and then, of course, went on further and listened on YouTube and watched. But so many things struck a chord with me and really hit home. So I wanted to have you on to kind of peel back some of those layers and discuss. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about that series and why it's so important right now to have those sorts of conversations?
That series came about as a result of me sharing my own experience about motherhood on the social. I was co-hosting and we were talking about a topic related to Lily Allen, and she talked about how children ruined her career. And I went on that day and I got really emotional, and I didn't expect to get as emotional as I did. But I think it's because the topic just hit so close to home for me. I do feel like my kids have affected my career and have affected my life as a whole in both beautiful ways and in ways that are really hard to digest. So I got pretty emotional, and the response to that clip was overwhelming, both in terms of response to the show and response to me personally. And I sat down with the show's executive producer and we were trying to figure out, okay, what do we do with this? People want more conversation. What do we do? And so we came up with the idea for this digital series. It's the social's first exclusively digital series, lives on YouTube. And the idea was to bring in other Canadian moms who wanted to have these conversations. And for me, the only stipulation was you're going to be honest. You're going to lay it bare. I wasn't looking for platitudes. I wasn't looking for the, beautiful quote boards you can find on Instagram. I wanted women speaking honestly about their experiences with motherhood. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, I interviewed a lot of women. A lot of women expressed interest in being part of this series. And the women that I landed on, the group was so cohesive. Everyone was so gentle and generous with each other's feelings. Everyone was so raw and so real. And the end result is exactly what I hoped it would be.
Oh, that's amazing. It's such an interesting time because I feel like people are talking about, all the different difficulties in even just pregnancy, getting pregnant or adoption or whatever it is, raising their children. But it's going to be hard. And you hear about some of the, you won't get any sleep and all those negative things that people kind of tell you, but nothing can prepare you. That's kind of the hard part, is literally you can read all the books and do all the research and talk to whoever, but they're never going to be, I think, fully honest with you in how hard. So did you have any idea? Because you have 2 kids, right? 2 boys?
I do. 2 boys, they're 2 and 5.
And did
I have any idea?
Yeah, were you shell shocked?
Yes, I was absolutely blindsided. I feel like I was on a different planet. And though I'm slowly finding my way back to planet Earth now that my eldest is 5, I'm still on my way there. Mm-hmm. I had no idea. And I think, that extends at both ends of the spectrum. I remember someone saying to me once that kids sort of unlock these emotions you have both for better and for worse. And for me, it's like, yes, I feel fortunate that the love I have for them is like nothing else. Mm-hmm. And also the rage I have felt, the loneliness, the resentment. I also didn't know I could feel those feelings as intensely either. Mm-hmm. I mean, did you feel like you had a clue?
No. I feel like I have 2 sister-in-laws. I have lots of friends that have had kids. And I'm like, why? Why is this happening? Why didn't we talk about that? And maybe they did. I just wasn't in that world. But luckily, one of my really good friends had a baby about 2 weeks before, and we lived really close. And I remember walking up towards downtown and here in Halifax, and her saying to me, "Do you kind of regret your decision?" And I was like, oh my God, maybe, I don't know. You're just in this whirlwind and you're so confused about your future. Just every moment you kind of think that this is your life and this is what it's going to feel like forever. And of course there's different ups and downs, but you kind of get in this trap and you don't know how to get out.
That's just it. And I try to remind myself that like everything is a phase, right? Like there may always be hards, but everything is a phase. And what I love about the story you just told is that clearly you have a great relationship with that person because she felt like she had permission to vocalize something that is so often unspoken. I mean, in the series that I worked on, we talked about unspoken truths related to how motherhood impacts your sex life, how it impacts your friendships, your confidence, how it impacts how you show up at work. One of the things we didn't touch, which I think is the next level of radical honesty, is women who regret having kids. I think there are many, many, many parents, women out there who do regret it, but it still feels so wildly taboo to admit that.
And Alex is amazing. She actually has been on here. We had a friend conversation, but she was the only person, if I didn't have her and the honesty, even almost 2 years into this later, I don't know what I would do, because she's like, this is shit. This is terrible. Like, how are we going to do this? How do we sleep? And I'm like, you're right. And I felt really lucky to have that, because a lot of people, and I think the generations before us especially, just kind of like pushed it down. I don't think they all could have loved it. Like, come on.
Definitely not.
No.
There's no way. I think there's so many different reasons why maybe, we feel like our generation is experiencing this differently. I think maybe they didn't have the vocabulary or the platforms to share how they really felt. I think there was such an expectation that based on gender, perhaps you'd perform life in a certain way. And so I do feel like we are more liberated than past generations to have these conversations. And for that, I feel so lucky. And yet I still think it's baby steps. I still think the more common response from older generations when you admit that you're struggling is something along the lines of like, you'll sleep again one day, you'll really miss these times. And it's like, yeah, that might be true, but that's not helping me right now. It's not helping me right now when I'm lonely as hell, when I haven't slept more than 5 hours in months, when I don't like the way I feel or don't like the way I look or don't like the way my relationship is. Telling me I'm going to be happy one day isn't making me feel better now, even if it is really well-intentioned.
Yeah, you do hear those sorts of comments so often, like they're only this age once, or just it goes by so fast. I'm like, cool. Yeah, life. Like, I'm only 37 once also. Like, let's just remember, as much as you love your child or children, you still have to connect and go back to yourself or your partner and remember, like who you are and why you're here, why you even started this family. And that can be hard, because I know my husband is the most easygoing, laid back person. And there would be times when Cash is in the bassinet beside us and we're like talking in the middle of the night, trying to figure out what to do or what we need. And I'm like, I'm literally going to kill you. Like, in my mind, and he had done nothing. Just the fact that we were awake in the night having a conversation was like torture.
Yes. And it's like, it's one of those things I remember feeling deep rage towards my husband. And just like what you just said, there was nothing he had done. And I think this is something else in terms of just honesty around motherhood. I didn't realize how much breastfeeding would tether me to that child. And I know feeding is much like sleeping and sleep training, like such a contentious mothering issue. And I feel grateful to have been able to breastfeed 100%. And yet, I think if I were to do it again, I might not have breastfed or pushed myself to breastfeed for as long as I did, because it was all me. That child was dependent on my body. And that really, really took a toll on me mentally, to not be able to leave that child for more than a very short amount of time. And then even when I could, the pressure like on the clock to get back to feed him, that really did a number on me mentally.
And the pressure on your body too, because then if you're somewhere, maybe you have to pump or do things like you're constantly thinking of that. Did you have any, I don't want to say regret, but did you think twice about when you had your second child that maybe you wouldn't breastfeed? Or did you think that because you did your first that you needed to kind of like do it, and because you could, that you felt like you had to?
It's a really good question. I think because he latched well, I just thought okay, well, I guess we're just going to do this again. And I think I'd also forgotten,
Right.
even though it had only been 2.5 years. It's amazing how quickly you forget what the sleep deprivation's like.
It's intentional, Kate. I think your brain is like, this is gone. Let's forget
honestly. So I don't know if I forgot, but with my second, he ended up just not wanting the boob one day, just out of the blue. And that was the best thing, because I think I would have tried to push and continue for the duration that I did with my first. And I just remember it was like a breath of fresh air when I could leave him and realize I can leave him with another adult who has a bottle and formula. That was amazing. But it's those little things that you don't realize before you have kids, the little precious moments of even just like sitting in the car by yourself, having 10 minutes to sit by myself in a car, even to this day, feels so precious to me. I had no idea how all consuming this would be. I don't know if you have felt similarly.
Yeah, I only have one right now. There's only one in the picture, but I often think about if we did have or try and have another child, what would that look like? Because then there's even less downtime, because there's not like the divide. There would be only divide and conquer, where sometimes if Jeff puts him to bed, then I can just like go and tidy up or make supper. But you must feel that as well. Just like there's no break because you're doing something or your husband's doing something. You guys kind of have to divide and conquer to handle the little beasts.
Yeah. 2 rocked my world. Let me tell you. 2 is, and I don't dissuade anyone from anything. I think everyone's got to figure out what works for their family. But like everything else related to motherhood, I just didn't quite realize how hard this was going to be. And there's beautiful moments, of course. I don't talk about those as much, because I think everyone knows there's beautiful moments with motherhood. There's remarkable moments where the 2 of them play together and hang out. And there's also a ton of very difficult moments where you feel like you're failing twice as much. You're being pulled in many, many more directions. You're trying to prioritize 2 human beings with very different personalities and very different needs. There's even less time to give to yourself, to your relationships. So it's tricky.
And what does a typical day kind of look like for you guys during the week to get everyone ready and situated and out the door?
My husband and I split who does drop off, who does pickup. We both work downtown Toronto 5 days a week, which hilariously now feels like a rarity, 2 people working out of the home, because at least around here, I live in a suburb just outside of Toronto. A lot of people work from home or work hybrid. But we both have to get out the door.
How long of a commute?
I take the train, so it's about an hour door to door.
Oh, wow.
So it's not, I don't know if I was going to say it's not too bad, but
I think
maybe
that's like
I just have
more
the
expected
Toronto
in Toronto. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So my husband does I get up at 5 a.m., try to maybe get a 30-minute workout in if I can, get a shower in. Inevitably, there's one of them in my bed from the night before who walked in. Unload the dishwasher, do all the kid stuff, get them dressed, get them breakfast on the table, run out the door to catch the train at about 7:15, work full day at the social. So I'm a producer on the show. I've been there since the very beginning. Some days I hop on the show. Other days it's producing and figuring out what we're going to talk about. Then 3:45, leave, train home, and then I do pickup. So I'll get the boys around 5, get home. If my husband hasn't started dinner, I start dinner. So that's 6 o'clock. Try to get them in the bath, 7:30. Usually I'm with them, putting them to bed. By the time the second one's in bed, 8:45.
Wow.
And then it's like, do I have an hour for me, And am I going to give that to me, or am I going to give that to our relationship?
Yeah.
And I think one of the themes that came up a lot in this series was this feeling of failing. And I think so many moms can relate to this idea of, if you give to one, you're not giving to another. So oftentimes I feel like if I'm failing, if I'm giving to my kids or giving to myself, well, I'm failing my partner because we haven't sat and connected in days. If I'm giving to my partner, well, then that's not time for me, or time I could be spending doing extra work and adding to my career. So there is that constant push and pull that I think you just somehow have to make peace with.
Yeah, I find that so hard too. I had posted something the other day because sometimes when my son comes home from daycare, I'm like, what should I do? Should I sit and focus on him and just play with him? But I have to make supper because I wasn't able to start supper. And yeah, you kind of start to go insane. And then I'm thinking, like, should I take him and go to the grocery store? Like, I find the anxiety trying to pick and choose what I should do or what's best for the family is like That's the hardest part for me, honestly, on a daily basis. And then if I feel like I didn't do something, like today, we had a bit of a rough day post pickup, then you feel like a bad person, a bad mom, and that, like you said, you're failing.
Yes.
And I think that it probably both parents do feel that way, but I feel like moms just do. I don't know, that mom guilt is real and it's terrible.
Yes. And I don't know about you, but I expected it to look different. For some reason, I always tied mom guilt to work. This idea that I'm going to feel guilty for leaving and going to work. And in fact, that is the last thing I feel guilt about. Like, I work to provide for our family. I work because I like working. I work because I think, I think that that's a big part of who I am. And I like that they see that. I feel no guilt about going to work. What I feel guilt about is all the things that you just mentioned. It's like, am I making the right choices for our family? If I want to make them a relatively nutritious meal, then I'm putting them in front of a screen for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can't feel guilty about that. And conversely, if I'm deciding to play with them, well, then guess what? I'm ordering a pizza or getting them McDonald's. And I do every Friday. Every single Friday at the drive-thru, I see my friend also at the drive-thru. And I'm like, should I feel guilty about this?
No.
Maybe. But you know what I mean? Like, so I totally relate to your feeling of sort of anxiety. Am I doing this right? And I do think that it's a pressure we put on ourselves as moms, or maybe sort of past generations of women have instilled this sort of rigid expectation of what motherhood should look like that we're then trying to fit into while also working outside the home in a way that just wasn't done, or to a level that wasn't done in the past. I'm not sure what it is, but I do totally agree that it's a mom thing more than it is a parent thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, totally. It's not fun. And yeah, like you said, I don't think I ever really thought about feeling guilty, but I remember the first few times when I would leave or go and do something, I would be like beside myself, even if I went to a Pilates class the whole time, just thinking about, I have to get back. The baby needs me. And now I'm like, he's fine. I'll take a little time and stop.
Yeah.
But certainly there are moments that, you feel like you're just going to explode because you know that they don't need you. You think that they need you. That's the hardest part, is like, they're fine. They're safe. They're, there's a roof over their head right now. Like, they're okay. But I do find myself getting, especially when my son started daycare, which was just in September, I found, that like 2-3 p.m. hour would hit, and I would just be anxiety ridden trying to think of like the things I needed to do. What's going to happen when I pick him up? Like, what are we going to do when we get home? How am I going to make supper? So hopefully one day this will all be behind us, but that's not helpful.
You know what, though? I heard a reframe that may be helpful, which was in terms of your feeling guilt about leaving him, which I'm glad is getting better for you. The idea that the more people, adults in your child's life, the better off he's going to be. Like, the bigger your village is, the more he's used to other people being part of his life, the better. And that to me was a really good reframe, because it was like, oh no, I'm actually doing you a solid by having many, many different caregivers and guardians in your life.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good point. I want to talk, you mentioned it earlier, and you also referenced it in the Today's Parent article that you wrote, but feeling that sense of boredom and loneliness, especially I'm assuming in the early days, like how much time did you take off? Was it during like a mat leave that you were feeling that way?
Yes. So I took 2 12-month-long mat leaves. Again, I did it without necessarily questioning whether that was the best choice for me. It just felt like the right choice. And for me, my mat leaves bookended the 2 years because I try not to keep track of that time of COVID. So essentially, I was home for 4 years straight.
Wow. Because
I was home for a year mat leave, work from home for a year mat leave. And yeah, the boredom was excruciating. And I don't know if this feeling was unique to me, or if you can also relate to this idea of, I felt so bored staring at this little lump of a human. And also it felt like I couldn't sink my teeth into anything else because I was on a feeding schedule, had to change his butt, had to count his poops, should probably get out for a walk. So it felt like I was bored, but it's not necessarily like I could tackle something else to diminish that boredom, because this little being was keeping me oddly busy. Mm-hmm. If that contradiction makes sense.
No, it definitely does. I remember being so bored, and wanting to work. And I was so envious. My husband was present for the first few weeks, and then he slowly started working more and more. And I remember just being so envious of him being able to work. And I'm like, you can still be, you're a new version of you, but you can still be you on a daily basis. Like you can go on your computer, get in the car, go where you need to go, and then come home later. And I do remember feeling bored and wanting to, and I did, because we have our own business, like write some emails and do some sales things, because they slept so much at the beginning. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? You're sleeping. And then as they get older and are awake longer and become more active, of course, that changes. But I still felt numb, like a little numb and bored to the situation. Like I didn't love it.
Yes. And I think that that's something else, right? That there's this ideal of mat leave that I think some women maybe experience. Like some women, I think I described it as thinking it was going to be like a hair commercial or like a detergent commercial, like your hair blowing in the wind with like a cup of coffee and beautiful
like
linens.
Napping with your baby.
Yes. Just this maternal bliss. And so there is sort of a shell shock when you realize like, oh, I'm just going to be at home with this child. And also this counterbalance of, and yet I know I should be grateful. I think that's something that plays with my mind a lot, because I am grateful with all things related to motherhood. Like I'm grateful that I could get pregnant. I'm grateful that I have a healthy kid. And I'm always conscious of that when I'm voicing the challenges. And I think you can hold both things, right? But so I'm grateful that we have mat leave in this country and that I was able to access it. But yes, I found it very hard. And to your point, it's like, I just wish I could have talked to adults, and not just adults at the park about sleep schedules and feeding, but just spoken to colleagues, like, I remember I was in a podcast club during mat leave, and it was great. And I met all these new women, and the idea was it was just like a book club, but instead of books it was podcasts. And I remember at the end of a session, we were leaving, and someone looked at me and in just the right tone of voice was like, "Are you okay?" You know, when someone asks that question, they genuinely mean it. And I don't know if you cry every time you go to the doctors.
Right
yeah. I feel like whenever I go to the doctor and they ask how I'm doing in that just like sensitive tone of voice, I'm just like, I'm fine. I'm totally fine. And I always start crying. So she asked it with just the right intonation. And I just broke. And I'm like, I'm so bored. Because I remember I was just going home to sit in my house for hours with this kid till my husband came home from work. And it sounds like bliss, but I really struggled with it. I remember making to-do lists. I had nothing to do, right? Like nothing besides feed the child. The second mat leave was a little bit different because I had another kid to consider, but I would just make to-do lists just so my brain felt like it could accomplish something that day, because I did not do well mentally just in this the 24-hour cycle of feeding, not sleeping, feeding, not sleeping. That messed with me.
And I feel like part of it probably is because you love your work and you love what you do. So that part of your identity is changed or just kind of like on pause, I guess. And I've talked to other moms who work in whatever industry, and it's like they can't even access their email. They're just like, I see you in 1 year, don't care. And they're just like happy as can be. And I remember thinking like, why can't I feel like that? And I think the picture has been painted like that for a long time, that you get to sit back, hold this baby, you're at home, you don't have to work. And it's like, yeah, it's not that. You are in like this insane state mentally. You're foggy, you're tired, your body doesn't feel strong like it used to. You're breastfeeding, you're just all over the map. I feel like it's just a lot hormonal changes for women to actually deal with at once. Like it's literally an insane period. Of course, everyone says it will get better. It will get better. And I'm like, stop telling me, when is it going to get better? I don't know. I feel like now my son's almost 2, and I like, though the tantrums aren't awesome, the emotional roller coaster, but I like it better for sure. I did not love the newborn stage, and I don't know if I could do it again. I don't know if I could like physically and mentally do it again.
Listen, that's fair, man. What I always say to people is trust your gut, because I just think there's no one who can tell you what your family plan should be. I think whatever that gut is saying is probably the best thing to follow. And I know plenty of people who have no kids who are happy. I know plenty of people with one kid who are happy. And I know plenty of people with multiple kids who are thrilled. So I think I think it really is such a personal decision of what do you want practically speaking, what do you want your life to look like? I know there's all those things you see on Instagram, like in 20 Christmases, just picture your kitchen table. And it's like, okay, thanks so much for that.
Yeah.
I really do think it's like a day-to-day thing. Practically speaking, what do you want your life to look like? And I think that's a much more helpful way of considering, the family planning in your future.
Well, yeah, I feel like society puts so much pressure on people to have more than one child, or people in general. It's like, I was asked actually today by someone in a harmless way, but a man just like, oh, when's a little girl coming? Or when's there another one coming? And I'm like, I don't know.
Stop it. Maybe never. I'm surprised that we're still, I shouldn't be surprised because I also have had people ask me, like, you going to try for a girl? Less so since the series. Less so since the series.
Yeah, they're like, Kate's out. She's done. She's out.
She's pissed.
Yeah.
Let's not ask her. But I'm surprised that in this era, we're still asking people about their fertility.
Mm. Do you think that there is a lot of shame that is put on women and moms to kind of not talk about some of these issues or the difficulties that they're experiencing? Because it could be if their child is a 5-year-old or a baby, whatever it is, there's always going to be difficulties. But do you think women still have a hard time admitting that to anyone or other women?
Good question.
Like, did you think even after your series, did more people then, even in your closer circles, let's say, or family, did they vocalize kind of like, oh, like I felt that way, I just never really said anything? Or
I think for me, what was remarkable was the feedback on social media. I was getting DMs from people, and I don't just mean like a line or two. I mean what amounted to like paragraphs of thank you so much for this. I feel so seen. And that was so validating. I do think a lot of women keep this stuff private. I mean, even my own family, I think they knew that I was struggling, but I don't think they quite realized to what extent until they watch the series. And I think in an odd way, sometimes it's easier to share this stuff with strangers than it is to share it with the people close to you sometimes. But certainly I think shame, for me, it's really prevalent, both shame about, my feelings about motherhood, shame about my children's behavior. My older son has some behavioral struggles. And when he acts out in public, the shame that envelops me is so deep. And the number of times I've left places where he's crying and then I get in the car and I'm crying because I'm mortified by his behavior and I don't know how to handle it. I experience that all the time. So I do think for me, shame has been a prevalent emotion through all this, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I think that they're basically an extension of you. You know what I mean? So when they're having those meltdowns or emotional or anything happens, you're like, you feel it. And it's hard to come back from that. It's hard for me to come back from that. And you can't, like my son's almost too close to your youngest. And I'm like, it's so hard to communicate and understand. And I beat myself up about it because I'm like, I don't understand why this is happening. I don't know what to do. Like, what do I do? I'm not going to call my mom all the time because she doesn't know. You just don't know.
Yes, but you feel like you should, right? Which is probably why you beat yourself up, because you think, oh, I didn't handle that properly. What did he need that I couldn't give him? For me, I often think like, what are other parents thinking? Like, I remember I used to think there were so many things I thought before kids that I'm like, who are you for thinking that? Like, I will never give my kid an iPad in a restaurant, or if a kid was acting out, like, why can't their parents control that kid? Like, how do they let him behave that way? And the joke's on me, because now I have that kid, right? And it's not for lack of trying. It is who he is. And he struggles with emotions. And it's not like we're not working on it, but for sure, I feel such shame and embarrassment about his behavior. And yes, people then putting that on me. And also, I was such a rule follower growing up. I still am. You don't get a kid that's necessarily you, right? Like, you're not necessarily going to get a kid who can be parented in the way that you were. And that for me has been like a real wake up obviously you don't get that kid. Like, what was I thinking? But because I wasn't a kid who stepped outside the lines, I have no idea how to parent one who does.
Right.
And that's been, and continues to be like a real work in progress.
Mm-hmm. I feel like my son is pretty calm and chill for the most part. And that, again, I think if we had a second one, there's no way, there's just no way they're going to be like that and have this temperament. I think that they would be spicy, and I just don't know if I could handle that. I want to talk for a second about the U.S. Surgeon General's advisory that they put out. I just want to know, do you think that people take that seriously, like as a whole? Like, I don't know if everyone, especially in the States, thinks that, oh, are parents really in a crisis? Like, is that really necessary?
Do I think that people are going to take it seriously? I don't know. Like, will it change anything? I can't speak to policy, but what I really hope is that it just changes conversations so that it normalizes conversations like the ones we're having, like the one I had on Momlife Crisis. That I think sometimes there are people out there who trivialize parental complaints as just them. They're just tired. They're just stressing. They're just complaining. Mm-hmm. They'll get over it. Versus like, no, this is actually deeply affecting my mental health. I am anxious, or I am depressed, or I am deeply lonely as a result of motherhood, or my relationship is really, really suffering. And so my hope is that when, in the past, there have been similar warnings for things like cigarettes, that it's a major health issue. So I like that this was on par with that. And my hope is that at the very least, it changes conversation, because I just think the expectations we have on parents right now are leading many of us to burnout. And it's just not sustainable to be parenting in the way that we're all parenting under the pressure that we're all under.
Mm-hmm. And it really comes down to many factors, but like financial is a big, big piece of that. I feel like it is expensive. It is stressful for families to, try and put food on the table or get from point A to point B, whatever it is, pay their rent. Like, that's a big part. Anxiety, social media to me is something that is really something I'm interested in learning about in terms of like the usage of small children and kind of our usage and how it affects us. And I think it's mentioned in the article, plays a big role in it as well, just adding to the amount of stress and things you have to worry about as your child can access these things. It's scary. And also like guns in the US, sending your child to school where there's so many scary moments or tragedies that happen. So there's just like a lot, like you said, a lot on our plate. We're carrying a lot, and it's not the same as it was when our parents raised us or grandparents. Because I think that generation, there's a huge shift right now with where we are as women and the amount of hours we put into our careers and work. And then we're still having to provide and do all these things at home. Most of our partners are a little more helpful, I think, nowadays, but it's just a different time. And I find that there's a really weird conversation sometimes that happens between different generations and kind of like the state of the actual union and what's happening with parents. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, do you, when you think about that conversation, is it along the lines of like, well, I did it, so you can do it too. Like, I did it and I'm fine, so what are you complaining about? Is it that?
Exactly. And my mom, Mom, I love you. But my dad had moved them for business reasons to a small town where neither of them grew up in. And then they got married, had my brother, a few years later had me. And she says repeatedly, no one helped me. I was completely alone. But I feel like that just got pushed down, and she like gets it, how I would feel that way. But I think she's like, it was worse the way I had it. It was worse, but it's not helpful for people that feel that way right now.
No, and there's no pain Olympics, right? Like, it's like her
no competition.
Like there's no winning when people compare. I wish, and then we kind of touched on this earlier. Like, I wish that women who kind of came before us as mothers had the vocabulary and the platforms to express how they felt. I don't think they did, and I feel for them in that way. And also, I think they forget, right? Much like I forgot between my first to my second, I think with time, you forget how hard it is. And you spoke to so many of the added pressures. There's also, you mentioned socioeconomic. There's also like racial differences in terms of how women of color experience motherhood and how they're treated in the medical system and otherwise. But yeah, technology, like when I think about technology, it's not just the stressors of my child's technology use one day and, everything, all the harms that can come with social media. It's also, I think, the pressure and expectations that we have as mothers because of what we consume on social media, right?
These scripts.
The sort of the scripts, the picture perfect this, the pretty lunch bags, but even the like child psychologist content. And like I like them. I like Dr. Becky as much as the next person. Like I follow them, but more often than not, I leave feeling like more of a failure because I never, ever do what they suggest. Ever. You know what I mean? I try to keep it in mind, but it just makes me feel like less than as a mom to consume all of this content, even when it's well-intentioned content.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And even more recently, I thought, I'm not going to sign my child up. He's so young for all these different activities at this age. People are doing like swimming and soccer and sports ball. And my husband and I both loved sports, played sports. He still is doing his like old timers hockey at Wednesday nights. But it's like the pressure to do things younger and kind of have them in different directions and activities, that just adds to the load of the parents and the stress. And why? Like they're two. I don't think it makes sense. And all the other thing I thought of the other day was like the not that there's anything wrong with this, to each their own, but all the seasonal photo shoots and the things like that. I said to my husband the other day, should we be doing a Christmas photo shoot? And he
is
like,
this
no.
the minis? I had to ask my friend what a mini was because they were all over Instagram.
So. Yeah. But I just like, I don't want to do that, but you feel like you should, or now I need to go on Canva and make a holiday card and like get a professional photographer. There's time, there's money. And like, I honestly just don't give a shit. So like, why would I do that? But when you start to see it and get inundated with these things, you feel bad or your child's not getting this and being left out. And I feel like that is a sick way of thinking.
Well, yeah, it's like you're worrying at 21, 24 months that your child isn't being set up for success because they're not playing sport ball. Like it's bananas.
It is bananas.
The only thing I'll say about the overscheduled kid thing, because we actually talked about this on the social the other day, was interestingly, I always used to assume, as I did before I had kids, that overscheduled kids, it was always because their parents wanted them to be like the next Sidney Crosby. You know what I mean? Like their parents wanted them to be the next NHL, NBA superstar, the next opera singer, the next pianist, whatever. But in our case, like for me, the reason, and my kids aren't scheduled in much, I don't think, like they're in 2 weekend things every weekend, one Saturday, one Sunday for half an hour. The reason I sign my kid up for activities is for me. Like, of course, I want them to be part of extracurriculars, etc. But at this age, it's about getting me out of the house.
Yeah.
And that was something I didn't consider before, was I really like leaving, taking them to karate. So I get some fresh air. I get to talk to other adults. It's sort of part of this village forming. And that wasn't something that I had thought about before.
Yeah, that happened to me. So we had lived closer to the city downtown here. And then we moved last September to more like suburbs, only 20, 25 minutes outside of Halifax, if you're familiar. But I felt really, really alone when I moved out there because I was further away from my friend Alex, who lived a 5-minute walk. She had gone to Australia. That's where she's from. So she's on mat leave. Her husband had time off. They took the baby. And I remember going for walks now in these more like suburban subdivisions, and I would just like cry. And I'm like, I'm so lonely. My baby's happy and he's sleeping and it's a sunny day in the fall. But I was like, I hate this. It's just like indescribable when you feel like that. It just kind of consumes you and smothers you. And I felt so guilty for kind of having those moments. But that is part of the reason I did start the podcast was me not knowing that a lot of people talked about this and wanting to have more conversations that are really comfortable, but are very common. And I think that just needs to kind of continue. And of course, there's so much love and so much joy. Like I didn't know I could feel that amount of love and joy that I have with my son. But then, then you crash. Like you referred to it as emotional whiplash, that you're just kind of feeling like the opposite emotions all at once, or one end of the spectrum to the other. And it's really confusing.
Yes. And as you can feel those feelings in the same day, in the same hour, as someone on the series joked, like in the same minute. And I swear I feel that every single day. Every day there is a moment of happiness and bliss. And this is exactly what I pictured my life looking like. And there's a moment where I feel like an awful, awful, awful mother, where rage consumes me, where I am overcome with how bitter and angry I am about all this. And this is every single day. And even just the pendulum swing or the whiplash is in and of itself exhausting.
Like trying to get out the door in the morning.
Yes.
Some days it's perfect and it's great and it's goodbye. And then other days you're like, why? Like I look at my husband and I just do like a face, and he knows that he needs to step in, because I don't want to lose. He's still so young. I don't want to like yell at him or lose it. But I mean, I'm sure people do. And
I do. And I feel I'm such a yeller, and I feel guilty every day about it. Every single day. Cause I'm calm. And then I snap. And, I'm obviously talking about it with a therapist, cause I know it's not healthy, and it's never pleasant to have your kids say you're scaring me. Like that's never pleasant to hear. But I think it's like when you're just tapped out and you're feeling burnt out. And the thing is, nothing about my life is abnormal, right? Like my job is, I would say, like a standard job. I don't think I exert more than an average person does. And yet it is still a struggle to just keep a house in order and just keep 2 kids afloat without losing your mind. And again, like I'm so conscious of my privilege. I have 2 healthy kids who don't have too many additional needs other than some extra behavioral needs. Like I often feel like I should be better at this and this should be easier. And yet almost every day I reflect on a moment where I just lost my mind and yelled relentlessly and loudly. And yeah, I'm not proud of it at all, but it's like, it's real life and you try to be a bit better every day.
Do you still feel exhausted? Like have your kids sleep through the night? You mentioned one of them or both of them coming in your room or your bed. Or do you still feel like you're on the exhausted train?
It's a different exhaustion. So unlike the newborn days where you would get maybe an hour or 2, maybe 3 at once, that was like true sleep deprivation where I felt sleep drunk. You know that feeling where you're just like
also breastfeeding babies sometimes, not always, but sometimes do require to be fed a little more. I think the milk's digested maybe a bit faster.
I believe I'm going to trust you on that one.
Like thinking of 1 to 2 to 3 hours of sleep right now is like, oh my God.
It was mental. I just remember it felt like I was drunk. It felt, and no wonder my emotions were so heightened. I was so weepy. I'm sure it was the hormones, but it was also that I was not sleeping. Now, the sleep is significantly better. One of them will come in my room at 2 a.m. and will often either sleep with us or I'll walk him back. Sometimes the little one will wake up, but the sleeping is, I can't complain. For me, the exhaustion now is in the emotional management. As I said, I have a kid who has just extra behavioral needs. So, anytime I say anything, I'm bracing for impact, that there's going to be a fight, that there's going to be conflict, that there's going to be pushback. And he's the type of kid who, once he's triggered, he goes off and he doesn't know how to control his emotions and he doesn't know how to self-regulate. And, the challenging part is I see sometimes in him the behaviors that I exhibit. So we're working through it. But that for me is what is so exhausting, is constantly screaming and fighting and arguing and trying to be reasonable, morning before work, getting to work, trying to lead meetings and be a professional and compartmentalize, taking that train home and then facing it all over again, and it's a lot. And that's the exhaustion now, is the emotional part.
I'm like you as well. I love on the weekends to do something. Like we have to have a play date. We have to go to the market. We have to do something because I value having my husband, my son, and I all together. Like I absolutely love that. But I think it's important to get out of the house and just socialize, and important for them too, because I don't know. I feel like everyone is on sometimes their worst behavior at home. Things just are comfortable for the little ones and they just like can lash out. Something I want to mention that I've been struggling, this is like a therapy session now, but struggling with is like I work for myself and then I also do the podcast, which is basically another part-time job. And my son started daycare, as I mentioned a few months ago, but I still have a hard time sitting and focusing every day. Maybe I have ADD, I do not know. But I find because I'm so used to like ping-ponging around the house trying to do everything when he's home, and especially when he was little, trying to multitask, that now I find it really hard to sit and focus. Did you ever feel that way? Or like, doesn't your brain feel like it got scrambled or reprogrammed somehow when you go back to work?
You know what? I think it's forced me to become like a hyper efficient machine at work. And I think sometimes it's to the detriment of my social relationships with my colleagues, because they'll want to talk and it's like, yo, I have to leave at 3:45. You know what I mean? Like, I got to get this done. And so sometimes I'll just put on my headphones and just work while people are still
The
talking.
clock's
And it's
ticking.
not right. It's not because I want to be mean. It's just because the daycare pickup needs to happen. The train doesn't wait for me.
Yeah.
So I think I don't have trouble focusing. For me, it's more I have to compartmentalize and put my head down and get stuff done. But I also wonder if that's because I work out of the house on a show that has deadlines. It's a live show. Like what I have to get done, I have to get done, or else it's going to be real problems. But if I was an entrepreneur, let's say, or doing my own thing, I mean, are you working from your home much of the time?
Exclusively.
So interesting you say that, because I completely understand where you're coming from, in the sense that one of the women who was on the Momlife Crisis panel also works from home. And she was like, I'm never not a mom. Even when I'm at work, I'm looking at dishes, I'm looking at laundry, I'm looking at toys. And so she kind of echoed your sentiment, right? That like, it's so hard to focus and lock in on being you, the employee, or you, the worker, or you, the business owner, or you, the entrepreneur, when you're staring at evidence of you, the mom.
Well, and I feel like I can't start work until, it's that like load that mothers are carrying. I feel like it was Oprah a week ago. Did you see that? I'll have to send it to you, that she
Her
posted.
special?
Yeah. I only saw the clips. I don't know if it's actually out yet, but I mean, I love Oprah. But the invisible load that mothers do carry, and I think that's part of it. And I can't start my work or do anything until I'm like, okay, the breakfast dishes are done. The toys have been put away. I've thrown in laundry, like made my bed, put his toys back in his crib or whatever, tidied his room. And then that could be like, a half-hour delay, and you can't just be. And then it's the guilt around like, I should make supper. I'm home. But I'm like, I don't want to make supper. Like that's taking away from what I'm trying to do. So it is this like cycle that you really can't get out of. So I'm working on that. And I feel like there's probably a lot of people listening that have felt that or are in the same situations.
Big time. And I wonder too if there's some strategy in changing your environment, like even if it's like a home office or going to a sort of WeWork space or even a cafe where you're purposely putting yourself in a position where you cannot be distracted by evidence of domestic life, because that would be so hard. That would be so hard. And I think so many moms I would feel that way if I was working from home, that I could be doing all these other things. So I should be.
Yeah. No, it's a struggle. It definitely is. Okay. So before we wrap, I also want to talk about having friends and socializing, especially friends that do not have children, maybe by choice or it just hasn't happened for them yet. What have your relationships been like with people or friends that don't have kids?
Listen, I think it's tricky, right? Like we spoke earlier about feeling like you're on another planet. I think you have to make a really concerted effort to prioritize those friendships. And I don't know if I've done a great job of it, simply because I feel like at the end of each day, I'm tapped out. So the idea of giving to another relationship when I can barely give to myself or to my husband, it's hard. I think some of those friends get it. I hope they get it. I think others may not. And I get why they'd be a bit upset and disillusioned with me as a friend and my inability to show up. And it's not for lack of caring. It's simply because of the realities of my life. But my friendships have changed in like a very real way. And I think that's not the case for all women. I think some women have a crew and that crew doesn't change. I'm someone who has, a friend here, a friend here, a friend here, a friend here, etc. But certainly as I have had kids, I've ended up becoming closer with women who have kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, just a lot of times born out of the practicality of the day, right? Like I became like one of my really good friends now is a woman who I met at the kids' daycare, and both her kids are in both my kids' classes. And I see her every day at pickup, and we text about what's going on at the school. And I just also really like her. Like we talk about this triangle theory in the series that you have to find the goal, if you can, is to find one friend or one woman in your neighborhood who you genuinely like, who lives near you and has kids about the same age.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can find just one of those, how remarkably helpful it is. So yeah, for me, my friendships have changed dramatically. And, I'm fortunate in that I think a lot of people have given me grace as I've navigated that. But kids have just taken up so much of my time and attention and energy that I do feel like I've let down some friends without kids. And that's not by design. It just is.
Mm-hmm.
Have you found that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I also felt a little bit of guilt with friends that have had kids before me and how I wasn't maybe the best friend to them. And I didn't understand or like try and understand what they were going through. Of course, now when someone has a baby, I'm dropping food off or I'm texting them like, can I just put coffee on your doorstep? Where before I didn't get it and I felt a bit guilty about that. And I'm like, well, if some of these people decide to have kids one day, they'll get it too. You know what I mean? Why I'm absent or things like that. And I love the point you said about having someone you like or someone to kind of lean on or have as a friend. I've got lots of people like that now where I've moved and we do hang out all the time. It's kind of like throw out a text, who wants to host or who wants to have coffee, because you're just in this shit show together and you might as well be in it together and be able to socialize. And then the kids kind of play and make a mess, but entertain each other and it's good for them. But in the beginning, being around some friends, and some of them are my good friends, and they're talking about shit and just like zoning out. And I'm like, I don't care, because your mental capacity, not in a rude way, but you just kind of like tune out and you're like, I have other things to think about, or I need to go home because this is uninteresting to me because I am in a different world right now. And that's kind of sad, but it's true.
It is sad. And like, I've also been in the position where, in my family, we're the only ones with kids on both sides.
Okay.
So when we go to family events, sometimes it's like, did I talk to an adult at all? I don't know if I did, because I was running around like a chicken with my head cut off, chasing my kids while the adults talk to each other. And it's not that they didn't try to help, oftentimes they did, but ultimately you're still the mom, right? Like, right. So yeah, I think there's a real, if you can latch onto people with kids, it's the best. And I always say, like, I hate going to parks. If I have to go to a park, I want to go with someone else, because I don't want to go to parks alone anymore. But finding your people, it makes a difference. And I also think there's seasons, not to sound like an Oprah or every momfluencer out there, but like there are seasons for friendships, right? Absolutely. And I think I'm at a time where I end up spending more time with my friends with kids, but I don't think that will always be the case.
Mm-hmm. No. And I second the park thing, because I didn't have childcare the whole summer. So until my son was 18 months, which a lot of my friends had all gone back to work at like the 10-month mark by choice, or the 12, maybe because they had added work pressure that they wanted to get in. Like one wants to make partner at her law firm. Like you got to get back in there and work. But I would go every single day, again, feeling alone. I would drive to different parks or walk to different parks just to get out before nap time. And I would just like sit there on the ledge and like play with the rocks kind of and just watch him. I'm like, this is crazy.
You're literally going for the change of scenery.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
I know.
It's crazy. And I actually made friends with someone, her name's Ashley as well. She lives down the street at the park. So sometimes when you go alone and another parent or mom is there alone, you can connect. But it definitely is, and I can only imagine in a bigger city or in Toronto that people maybe just don't want to socialize. They kind of keep to themselves at the park. So it can be probably hit or miss.
I think it is hit or miss, but to be fair, it's hit or miss in my brain too. Like some days I want to be the chatty Cathy who's like, hey, how old are your kids? So great. What school? Yada, yada. And some days I just want to sit and scroll Instagram,
Mm-hmm.
And there was one time where I feel like I was scrolling for a little too long and I look up at my 2-year-old at the top of a climber and he's like, hey, mom, look. And he must have been like 7 feet in the air. And I'm like, oh, maybe I should be paying like this much more attention.
You're like very athletic though. Good job.
Yeah. Well done.
Just don't fall. One funny thing I do, like I kind of recognized, I guess, about going to the park is that your child then maybe kind of starts to interact with other kids of different ages, not just their age. And then sometimes there's like moments where you have to tell the child like, oh, I don't know. I found that weird. I'm like, do I have to talk to these other kids and like tell them like, don't touch that? You know what I mean? I don't know. That was weird for me. I didn't expect that.
Isn't that funny? Totally. Because you're like, do I have to step in and parent these people? Where are your parents?
Or if they like start throwing rocks at my child, I'm like, can you please stop?
Yeah.
Not do
Johnny,
that?
Johnny, stop.
Yeah.
Put the boulder down.
Yeah. Where's your mom or dad?
Yeah. Johnny, you're a jerk.
Yeah.
No, I know. We went like recently that we were at a park and there was all these teenagers running. They were playing tag and they were going to trample my 2-year-old. And I finally said like, hey guys, this is a playground. You're 14. You know what I mean? Like, can you just
I've seen
step
that.
off or at least watch the toddlers? But yeah, that's a weird one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. Well, Kate, this has been so amazing. And I'm so happy that you agreed to come on because I was just blown away with your conversation and like the honesty and the darkness that you guys kind of got into at times, but it needs to happen. Like those conversations from miscarriage just to, like you said, rage and all that, like that really does need to come out in the open more often because it's real and we're dealing with that. And there's only, conversations to be had to help us get through it or ask for professional help, of course.
Thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for inviting me on your show. Like, I think podcasts like these are ones that people need to hear, right? Because I think when you mentioned like crying on a walk, people then know they're not alone. So I so appreciate the time and I appreciate you watching.
Amazing. And if people want to connect with you or learn more about the work you do or the Momlife Crisis series, where's the best place to do that?
So if you want to follow me, I'm at KMcKenna77 on Instagram. And if you want to watch the series, you can go to the Socials YouTube page. That's youtube.com/thesocialctv. And you'll find all of the Momlife Crisis series there.
Highly recommend. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.